Hey, what's up you guys, the Curious Owl here, and today I am doing the mid-year book freakout tag. So I'm a little bit late on this train, mostly because I just didn't want to get around to doing this, but I was tagged in this by my friend Brandy at Books with Brandy Shanae, so I felt like I needed to do it. So here we are. Hopefully this gets out sometime after the 18th. That's the day I'm filming this, but we'll have to see because things have been very crazy for me for the last couple of weeks, even though this was kind of my month where I wasn't going to be putting out too much content because I am nothing if not an overworker by nature. But the mid-year book freakout tag is basically, for those of you that don't know, a partway through the year tag where we check in on goals, things that we've read, things that we've enjoyed, things we didn't enjoy, stuff like that. So let's see what I have to say. First question is, what is the best book that I have read this year so far? Now, I am having my journal with me right now because I cannot remember half of the stuff I've read so far this year. Like, I will say that I've had quite a few 5 stars, so it's hard for me to be able to pick what are some of my favorites, but let me go through and see what I can find. So the one I'm gonna go with is one that I was really surprised to have enjoyed as much as I did, and that was Ace of Spades by Ferida Abike Iyamide. I read this back in March, I think. This was for Princess at Castle Library's Royally Booked Book Club. This was the first book that she had picked for this book club, and I just absolutely loved it. It was very disturbing in a lot of ways. Do not get me wrong, there are massive trigger warnings for homophobia and racism, like heavily on the racism, but this was just one of those books where this still sticks out in my mind when I think of my 5-star reads for this year. Like, when I went through my journal and was looking at all the 5-star reads I had, this one was immediately the one where I was like, this one has to be beat, because so far nothing's beat this. Like, there have been some really close ones, and there's definitely been some ones that I definitely feel like deserve to have been marked as 5 stars, but this one has stayed in my mind since I read it in March, and I do not know if there's going to be anything to top it yet. Next question is the inverse of that. What is the worst book I have read so far this year? So I have had quite an issue with quite a few books this year. As much as I've had some great reads, 4 or 5 star specifically, I've had quite a few DNFs and 2 stars also this year. But the books I'm gonna go with are part of a duology, and that is The Talisman and then The Black House by Stephen King and Peter Straub. The Talisman I think I gave a 3-star to, and The Black House was a 2-star. Honestly, probably could have been a 1-star and I would have been fine, but either way, these two were just such major disappointments when I was going through my Stephen King reading series, because I was so bored, especially in Black House. Like, Black House was definitely the one that was the worst of the two, but this duology, I feel like I just honestly wasted my time. There was no point in reading them. I felt that I really just could have never read these and gone on my merry way and been perfectly fine for the rest of my life. They were uncomfortable. There was a lot of usage of the N-word that I was very, very unaware of and uncomfortable with. But these 2 books really made me start questioning why I even started reading my Stephen King books, because honestly, I'm not feeling like I'm really missing out on too much by not reading the rest. I feel like at this point in my life, there's no point in me continuing with his work, even if it might have got better as time goes on, because I'm no longer interested, and I feel like I'm getting to a point where, especially in the time frame that I've been reading his books, with these 2 specifically, it's only going to get worse from here, and then it's not going to be until, 10 plus books later I'm going to get to something that I'm going to actually enjoy. So why even really bother putting myself through that? So I then decided to unhaul all of my other Stephen King books, because I don't think I'm going to really reread any of them, first of all, and second of all, again, I don't feel like I want to continue with reading his books, so why even have them on my shelf? Next question is, what is the best sequel I have read? So I was really surprised with quite a few reread/finish series I did this year, but I think the one that immediately comes to mind, honestly, is the concluding novel to the Renegades trilogy, because I was so shocked with how Supernova ended up ending off the entire series. It was amazing. It was just exactly what I had hoped for, but it wasn't exactly how I thought it would go, if that makes sense. Like, I hoped for the kind of ending that we got, but I didn't expect it to be done in the way it was. And it just left me so surprised, but so happy at the same time, that I feel like, honestly, this was like the best ending to a trilogy I had found in quite some time. The next is, what is a new release you haven't read yet but want to? And I have quite a few. There's a couple of books I've hauled recently that are fairly new releases. The one I'm gonna go with though for this one is The Final Strife by Sarah El Arifi. This one specifically I want to read because of the fact that both Bree from Bree Cherie Reads and Brandy had read this for Brandy's book club in the month of July, which I wasn't able to participate fully in. And the synopsis is set up where it's a world that is very much, you know, set around what kind of blood does a person have and how does that, you know, create their standing in this world. Very similar to kind of, I think, how Children of Blood and Bone had done it, which I really, really liked. And then there's other books that have also like played on this trope, but they've said that it sounds absolutely amazing. So I'm very excited to read it as well because I trust their opinion. Okay, had to swap out my battery there for a second, but the next question is, what is my most anticipated release for the second half of the year? And I'm chomping at the bit for Babel by R.F. Kuang to come out. I know that as soon as this book gets released in August, I am going to get my hands on it as soon as possible. And then I'm gonna hold off until September to read it because my August TBR is already going to be very, very packed. I already know what I'm gonna be reading in August, and I don't think I have any time to read Babel during that time. But once August is over and I can get to my September TBR, y'all better believe this is gonna be one of the first books I read in that month because I love R.F. Kuang's writing and I cannot wait to see what I think of this, considering that everybody who has been reading the arc of this has said it is absolutely amazing. So I can't wait. Next question is, what was my biggest disappointment? I think in terms of not looking at the worst book I ever read, because these books weren't the worst I ever read. This was though my biggest disappointment in terms of a series, and that was the Practical Magic series by Alice Hoffman. I went into this knowing that the book of Practical Magic by itself was going to be very different than the movie, but I really hated the fact that not only Practical Magic, but then the sequel, The Book of Magic, was just not at all what I had even expected the books to end up being, because the overall story just did not make sense going into what I knew of the movie, and then having read the two prequel books to Practical Magic, it just did not go in the way I had wanted it to. And I think that nothing about those books made sense because the two prequel books had a very set way of the story being told where it focused on a very particular generation, whereas Practical Magic focused more on the daughters of Sally, as opposed to focusing on Sally and Jillian as their generation of witches, and then the sequel focusing on the daughters. I did like the way that they kind of went about actually breaking the curse that the Owens women were under, as opposed to what was done in the movie. I liked the idea of it, but I would have actually really, I think, liked it more if the books had done what the movie had. Like, the movie honestly is just way better, and I was really, really upset with the way that this whole story ended up going because I just don't think that it worked at all for what we were kind of led to believe the books would be about based on the movie. Like, whoever did the screenwriting for Practical Magic, the movie, did honestly Alice Hoffman a huge favor because the movie was way better. Next question is, what was my biggest surprise for this year? I think that, honestly, reading A Court of Thorns and Roses and now having today, as I film this, finished A Court of Mist and Fury is one of my biggest surprises of this entire year. I did not expect to love this series so far as much as I have. When I filmed this, I just finished A Court of Mist and Fury earlier in the day and gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. I absolutely loved A Court of Mist and Fury so much, and I have so much respect for people who say that this is one of their most favorite series because I get it. I love the way that Sarah created the character of Rhysand specifically, and just the ending of A Court of Mist and Fury, I cried like 3 separate times. Like, I did not expect to get this attached to characters in this series. I thought that this was gonna be a really big disappointment with as hyped as this series has been, but I'm so genuinely and pleasantly surprised that that's not the case. Next question is, who is my favorite new author? Honestly, this should not come as a surprise to many of you if you've been following along with the fact that I've been doing the Brandon Sanderson read along with Bree and Brandy, but Brandon Sanderson, one of my new favorite authors for sure. Like, auto-buy, will get everything this man ever puts out. I loved Mistborn Era 1 so much, and as much as I didn't care for Mistborn Era 2, I love Brandon's writing. I think that it is just absolutely beautiful, and I think that he is so clever with his way of constructing plot and creating worlds, and I cannot wait to be able to dive into more throughout the rest of the year. Next question is, who is my newest fictional crush or newest favorite character? Rhysand. Oh my god, Rhysand. I just adore him. Like, I've always been a girl who is attracted to the dark, mysterious, brooding characters, but especially with how A Court of Mist and Fury went, I have so much more respect for him. And like, his whole reveal of him like talking about since the beginning of what's been going on, like how he dealt with things, especially when they went through A Court of Thorns and Roses, I'm like melting in my seat for this fictional man. I get it. I understand why everybody thirsts over him, because I'm thirsting over him too. Like, next question is, what is a book that made you cry? I have had, obviously, Court of Mist and Fury made me cry, like I said earlier. I don't think I've had too many books that made me cry, except for They Went Left by Monica Hess. When I read that one in March or May, I can't quite remember, that book was so sad, but that one was specifically because of the fact that it's placed like just after World War II, so obviously it's gonna have very, very upsetting topics, but like, just reading from a character who was separated from her family and trying to find her family again, like, if that book doesn't make you at least emotional in some capacity, like, you don't have to cry, but if you don't feel for that character and the sadness and the loneliness that that character felt, I'm sorry, there might be something a little bit off about you. Next question is, what is a book that made me happy? Wow, there's quite a few. I mean, most of the 5 stars I have genuinely made me happy in some capacity, so that's a really hard thing to pin down, except for one, and it's because it gives me the warm fuzzies when I think about it all the time. And that's Kith and Kin from the Critical Role world by Marieke Nijkamp. When I first read this book in January, I already knew it was going to be a 5 out of 5 stars because, for one, it's involving my 2 favorite characters from the Vox Machina campaign that Critical Role did, Vex and Vax. It's narrated by Robbie Daymond, who is now an established part of the Critical Role family, and his voice is like butter to me. I'm just like, ugh. And like, I have always wanted to know more about Vex and Vax before they became part of Vox Machina, and this story did everything I wanted it to and more. So obviously this had to have been one of the ones that made me the most happy, but like, this one, it's like a whole other level. Because like I said, all of my 5 stars have made me happy in some capacity, but this one has a very special place in my heart that I have to make sure I mention it in this video, otherwise I think there's something wrong with me. And the final question is, what books do I need to read by the end of the year? That's a really loaded question. Why would you even answer that? Everything. I have to read everything by the end of the year. Are you nuts? But in all seriousness, the books I really want to finish are really just the ones that I'm going to be doing readathons, read-alongs with, so my Brandon Sanderson books, Court of Thorns and Roses, book club books, those kinds of things. Like, those are really the only ones I am focused on finishing this year. Everything else is kind of just gravy on top of that. Anyway, that is all for the mid-year freak out book tag. If you guys have not done this tag as of yet, I would highly suggest you do so and consider yourself tagged if that's the case, because you need to do the tag if you haven't done the tag yet. Like, you're more late to the party than me, and I'm very late to the party, I would say. So let's get it together, people. Thank you all so much for joining me in this video. If you guys did enjoy it, please do give it a big thumbs up. And if you haven't already and you'd like to be and would like to see more content like this, go ahead and hit that button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock. And I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye, guys.